Welcome to this week's episode of Living in Wholeness. I am Jackie.
And I'm Keisha. We have a special guest joining us on today's show.
Chris Honeycutt, welcome.
Thank you, ladies.
Chris. Today we are talking about structuring for growth. I like to call growth in all of its forms challenges of life. You know, when growth happens and takes place, there's certain things that you have to do in order to prepare for that growth coming. What are some key questions, Chris, that a church or organization should ask to see if they need to start the restructuring process?
Sure. There's a lot of different metrics a church can be looking at. A lot of times we don't like to think of church or ministry as a business, but there are certain things that we always need to be kind of aware of. In the business world, you have something called a SWOT analysis. Right. And basically that's kind of taking inventory of a lot of the different things coming in and out of a church, or in that case a business, but a church has to have a review process. A lot of churches do this, a lot of pastors do this on a weekly staff meeting.
Right.
Or sometimes it might be a board meeting, a deacon meeting, something of that nature. But so many times churches are unwilling to kind of look at a deeper level, and that comes out of doubt and fear and lack.
Right.
That's where a lot of churches just kind of become stagnant.
Right.
And they're unwilling to look at themselves in the mirror and say, you know, what is not working? What is stagnant? What is in decline? What is something that just hasn't been working? And that's something that training churches comes alongside churches and says, you know what, here's a blind spot. Here's a roadblock. Here's a challenge that you need to overcome if you want to see growth. So some of the questions that pastors can be asking is, what are some of the things that have become stagnant in our church? If there is a certain program or ministry that just isn't reaching people, that isn't really hitting the mark.
What isn't working?
What isn't working? And is it something that is maybe just a pet project of one of the members or one of the board members or one of the staff, maybe even the pastor? A lot of churches today, they'll still have, say, a knitting circle or quilting ministry or something of that nature because it appeases a certain group, but yet it isn't attracting new people.
Absolutely.
Things of that nature where we need to always review the life of the church.
Mm-hmm. But how often, how can you tell? Because you can be in a ministry, allow it to flow for 6 months, and they say, well, it's not working. But you didn't give it enough time. So how much time should you give a ministry in order for you to determine truly this ministry is not working?
Sure. And you say the time frame of 6 months. 6 months back in the apostles' days was like 6 years. When the apostle Paul would stay around and plant a church, he was usually there maybe 3 months at a time. And that was a long time back then. And that's where today we kind of have a different view of time because we have everything segmented, everything in convenience, shape, or form.
Right.
And this is where 6 months is a long time in the church.
Absolutely.
Because you're talking a lot of different things that you could be doing during that time, and that's where it's always good to start in advance. It's always where advanced prep when it comes to, say, a message series or programming for like a summer schedule or outreaches, Bible studies, small groups, all that needs to be done in advance as far out as possible. I know of some pastors that do their message prepping for a series with their creative team 18 months in advance.
Wow.
And it's because it doesn't mean that guy can't speak to them and change it up anytime in between then. It's just a matter of a process of excellence.
Right.
And the more advanced prep we put behind something, actually what I believe the Holy Spirit can bring out more. Mm-hmm. And we're not putting, say, our creative people in stress. We're not putting our staff in stress. Really, we're not putting ourselves in stress. The more I know I'm going to talk about money, say 2 months from now, I'm picking up all sorts of allegories and examples and real life stuff that I'm able to draw out of it. Mm-hmm. So in the church, it's where 6 months is plenty of time to turn things around, to see where, again, if something doesn't have enough time or does have enough time, if we've been fair to it or not, if we've resourced it sufficiently.
Right.
Gotcha.
That's where, again, we look at it, make sure it had its fair shot, and then, we pray about it. We put everything to prayer. We make sure that, that again, if it's something that we really feel is needed, but just maybe hasn't quite gotten there yet, give it more time. But there's a lot of things in the church that really just are fat, and they need to be cut away from the meat. And that's where so many times churches have excess rather than are really efficient
Right.
with the funds that they have to use, or not being good stewards.
Yeah. Well, you can start programs, in a church, and it becomes kind of a sacred cow. So you
Absolutely.
continue to do it for years and years and years without knowing why you're doing it.
Absolutely.
So it's very good to look at that and
Yep.
say, okay, do we still need to do that?
Sure.
Can this die?
Yep.
Or does it need to die?
Yeah, a good example would be, in a lot of churches today, you still have Sunday school. And a lot of people are just in love with the name Sunday school. They love the idea of Sunday school. The problem is, that's something that was a method or mechanism that worked 50 plus years ago. Maybe it doesn't work so much today. We have a different culture today. So what works better maybe is a home group or a small group or an external Bible study outside of the church.
Right.
We're getting away now, thankfully, of everything having to happen within the four walls of a church building.
Right.
That, the church is people. That's what we lose sight of. We think church is a location, not as an identity.
Right.
So we
Right.
have to, again, make sure that everything that we do builds up on that idea of we are building up a family, we're building up people, we are reaching people.
Right.
We're not trying to grow a building, we're not trying to grow a
Right.
location. So everything that we do has to come under that idea that we are going to pour into people.
That's good.
And what's the best way that we do that? And that means there's some sacred cows that might have to die as a result of that. And some people may not like that, but you know what? Those people aren't the people we're trying to reach.
Right.
And then some arguments could be made, well, those are the people paying the bills. Well, the problem is what I see in churches today that rely on the people that just pay the bills and they have to have their thing in place. You're not going to grow. You'll be stagnant,
Right.
but you won't grow. You'll be able to pay your bill, but you're not going to grow. And that's where, again, we don't want to operate out of fear, out of losing that one member,
Right.
out of upsetting the few stubborn Christian people. We really have to have the heart of reaching the one sheep, so to speak,
Right.
like in that song, Reckless Love.
In the restructuring process, what part does vision play into that?
Vision is everything. It's where there's so many times in churches today, they operate out of, again, fear and doubt and lack and stagnancy and doing routine after routine and traditions. Vision breaks through all that. Vision is breaking new ground. It's something new. It's something that gets people excited. And it's something that isn't just carried by one person. A vision has to be where, if it's from God, other people will instantly recognize it and say, you know what, that's right. I see that. And they want to help in any way, shape, or form that they can to make that a reality. And so a pastor has to be able to cast that vision, make it where, again, there's some on-ramps, there's some attachable things, there's steps to that. Not every bit of that vision is going to be overnight. It's going to be where, again, we see eventually, maybe even 5, 10, 20 years from now, it becoming reality, but we're getting there.
Right.
But yet, there's so many churches that don't even have a vision. I will go into a church and I'll say, hey, what's the vision of this church? And they'll just kind of look at me with deer in the headlights.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's very unfortunate that so many times that pastors don't feel like they have the liberty to cast a vision. They're kind of there collecting a pension and paycheck, and we don't want them to be restricted like that any longer. We want to come alongside those pastors and help them identify what are some of the roadblocks and barriers to implementing a vision, to making sure that, if they have something that's from God, that they're not going to let anything or anybody get in the way of that.
Right. Right. How do they come up with that vision, Chris? Should it be the DNA of the pastor, the DNA of the church? Well, the church DNA should be the DNA of the pastor.
Sure.
You know, how is all of that formed and come up
Well,
with?
it's where it's kind of a number of things coming together. It's where the first place you start, it has to come from God. And
Absolutely.
usually it's in the setting of, okay, this is the vision I have for this community, for this area, not just for the church. The church is something that is to affect a community at
Absolutely.
large.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so when we talk about vision, it has to be bigger than ourselves.
Right.
Because if it's just ourselves, hey, I have a vision, we're going to have a great worship ministry. Okay, that's great, but I would hope we have a bigger vision than just that. This is where, again, we have a vision for getting people off drugs and working with the business community to create jobs and resource people and help people. And this is where, again, we go beyond just what maybe even traditional church help looks like. We want to make sure that, again, we're become influencers in the community. And so that means that we have to hear from God. We have to make sure that we're giving our church members, our church staff, everybody that's involved in the church steps and on-ramps to be able to, again, help them buy into it, to participate in fulfilling it, let them have the long-term vision of it, of realizing this ain't going to be overnight, that they're in it for the long haul, that their gifts and their talents and their experience is valued, that whatever they feel called to do has a purpose in that vision.
That helps
Right.
get everyone on board.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What happens to a church when they don't have a vision, when they don't plan for growth?
Well, there's I'm trying to put this in the nicest way possible. I mean, they will die. I mean, maybe not today, but they will die eventually. And there's more churches than not that are like that operate out of, this is how we've always done it. We're just going to be here and do what we know. And that's just unfortunate, because what we're seeing in Europe always eventually comes back in America.
Right.
This is where in Europe we're seeing a lot of people withdraw from the Christian church. We saw it become more secularized. Now we're seeing the Muslim faith grow as a result, because that's filling in that void. And what we want to see in America is all these churches we see on a lot of blocks in our towns and cities. We don't want those to become coffee shops.
Right.
God bless coffee shops. I love
Right.
coffee shops. But
Right.
we want them to know that they have a purpose, they have a vision, that they're filling their people up with inspiration, and making sure that they're giving them every tool available to them to enable them to grow spiritually, but also to have an impact in their homes, in their schools, their workplaces. And so many churches just don't know how to do that. And this is where, again, operating out of a vision helps move all that along.
Right. That helps you to see, okay, we no longer need to do this when you know
Right.
where you're going. How often
Absolutely.
should you look at your vision, since that's key in restructuring?
Healthy churches always look at their vision in the sense of, this can be adapted, this can be changed, because when we see a vision, when we hear a vision for the first time, we don't have all the particulars. I kind of liken it to maybe your grandma's recipe for a cake or something like that, and maybe some ingredients that were around 30 years ago aren't around today, or they're not available to you, and so you have to adapt it, or you have to put your own flair and flavor to it. And in this sense, it's always where you look at a vision and you see, okay, the ultimate goal is this. How do we get there? We thought we had to do this, but maybe we need to try this.
Right.
And so I would say a lot of pastors will say, you know what, maybe we need to look at changing what our core values are and how we communicate those, or maybe we need to look at, do we have the right staff? Do we have the right people that are going to help us get there?
Execute
Right.
that core
That's right.
value. Yes.
And so this is where it's something, again, we always put everything through a review process. It's not something that we do out of fun. It's never fun to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's where we want to make sure we're of excellence.
It's necessary.
It's necessary.
And it's okay to change the vision
Absolutely.
in the process of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say it's not even necessarily, I would say, making changes to the vision. We don't want to necessarily change the vision because that's the vision we heard from God and
Right.
at least hopefully have. And it's where, again, those particulars don't need to be
steps.
sacred cows.
Right,
Yes.
Yeah.
right,
The steps to get to that vision may
Yeah.
change.
right. I believe pastors and leaders, most of them, majority, 99% have very good intentions on wanting to see growth in the church, wanting to see their people healthy,
Yeah.
the body growing. But what do you see are some areas or reasons why pastors don't see growth, in their church?
Wow. So basically, again, I go back to what I started off with. A lot of times we like to keep ministry and business in separate worlds, and really both could learn a lot from each other.
Right.
And the business world can learn about vision and casting vision and building people up and investing in people. And the church could learn a little bit about organization and keeping things to where, again, we have checklists and we have systems. And so part of what we do with training churches is we help churches implement systems. And we give them review processes and checklists. And this is where, again, we put everything through a ringer. We put everything to a test in the sense of, what is it that we can do every week that's the same in the sense of, we know this chair goes here. We know this is where the coffee's set up at. How do we do that? How do we show someone pulling a new volunteer or serve team member in, showing them how to set up the coffee? And
Right.
a lot of us say, well, I set up the coffee every week. We don't need another person. Guess what?
We do.
It's about scalability.
Absolutely.
Yes.
If we want the church to grow, we have to prepare for that growth.
Absolutely.
It's going back to advanced preparation. Again, we don't try and prepare for what we already have. We prepare for where we want to go.
Absolutely.
And so this is where, again, we always pull someone else in. It's kind of a show and grow mentality that, hey, I'm going to show you how to do this. Therefore, that person is growing in their ability to serve in the church. And therefore, we have a whole team of people making coffee or helping with kids' church or any number of things. And that way, it's where we're always prepared. We're not having to do what a lot of churches do on a Sunday and says, man, we sure could use a lot more volunteers in kids' church. If you love kids, why don't you volunteer? And I've heard
Right.
all that before
Right.
in, in churches where, again, the pastor's just pleading for help in the nursery and it's where it's just so unfortunate. There's better ways to go about it. That serve team members need to be recruited from a centralized process of maybe through a new members class or through a discipleship growth track or something along those lines. And it's where, again, that vision is cast and they're part of a process where, say, whoever's owning that process, whether that's a senior pastor or a associate pastor or growth pastor, whatever it might be, can help place them.
Absolutely.
And it's not so much dependent on the staff member for recruiting.
Right.
Because a lot of times we'll stress out our staff saying,
Right.
you need to get more volunteers. And really that needs to come from a centralized process rather than a local process.
That gets into kind of a leadership development.
Yes.
Chris, you've told us a lot today, some things of what training churches can do for churches. Can you think of anything else you'd like to share with everyone today?
One of the things I think is really neat that we do is something called the on-site assessment. In the business world, they call this an audit. All right, but don't think of it like the IRS. This is where we really come alongside the church and say, you know what, we're going to pretend we're first-time guests. And we're going to put everything through the lens of someone that's there for the first time and checking out a church. They're trying to find a church. Is this a church for them? And so we look at everything. We look at the bathrooms. We look at the parking lot. We look at the children's facilities. Really, we look at that almost more than anything else because statistically speaking, churches grow by the health of their children's ministries.
Absolutely. It's one of the key areas.
Absolutely. And so this is what I love about churches that are growing, they have very intentional areas for children, and they have a security check-in process for that. That's fantastic. That's, again, a good sign the church is healthy and growing. And then you always have that church that has the one poor old lady in the back room with 20 kids running around, and she's about to pull her hair out, and she does it every single Sunday. Is that going to help grow the church? The answer is no. And so we help communicate that to the pastor, to a board, to staff, to whoever we're delivering that report to, and say, you know what, these are some things you need to look at. And this is also where we do a follow-up process. This is where we wait to hear back from, say we filled out a connection card. What do they do with follow-up? What do they do with that first-time guest? Do they have a next step? Do they invite them to something? Do they really help pull that person into an opportunity in the church? So that's where a lot of churches drop the ball. They'll have a first-time guest, and then they do nothing with them. And it's very unfortunate. They just hope to see them again on another Sunday. A lot of churches don't even, what we call, have a connection card. Then I've seen some churches where they'll even literally make the visitors stand and give their life story or their testimony or anything.
It's old school.
I was like, don't do that.
So you help them streamline and see every area for the restructuring process.
So
how long does that normally take for you to do? A month, 2 months?
So the on-site assessment is just one Sunday morning.
Okay.
Now sometimes we'll do a follow-up if, say, the pastor said, oh, our worship leader wasn't there that morning, come back another Sunday or something like that. We'll try and work with them there. But really, typically, it's just one Sunday. We say, hey, even if this isn't your best shot, make sure, again, that you know that we're looking at this through the lens of a first-time guest. A visitor may not be there for your best shot, your best sermon, your best worship service. So think of it that way. But this is where we deliver the report, and then we have some next steps for that pastor, for that church. Here's some opportunities. Here's some opportunities. You can address this gradually. Things that you need to look at immediately. There's maybe some grave sins in there that we need to look at. But we also highlight the good. We encourage them. We say, you know what, you're doing this great. You're doing this well. We want to see that more and more happen. But this is where it's a first step for us in that relationship. We don't just do overnight contracts, so to speak. We really look at the on-site assessment as a first step in a relationship in helping that church become more and more healthy.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Thank
Training
you so
Churches
much.
has a lot to offer churches with the restructuring process of everything they can look at. Well, thank you all for joining us on today's show. Catch us next time as we continue this leadership discussion. And on our next show, we'll be talking about leadership development.